You know how when you watch an avalanche on video, it always starts with that one like tiny, almost invisible crack in the snow.
Right, yeah, like you pause the video and point and say, ah, that's it. That's where the whole mountain just gave way.
Exactly. But if you were actually standing on that mountain, you wouldn't just be looking at the crack on the surface. You'd be, feeling the ice shifting miles beneath your feet, hearing the deep groans of the glacier.
Because the whole structure was already fundamentally compromised long before that surface fissure even appeared.
Exactly. Well said. And today, which is Saturday, August 1st, 2026, we are looking at a crack in the ice. Because breaking news has just emerged of renewed fighting between Ethiopian federal forces and Tigrayan forces near a town called Shererina.
Right, and Shererina sits right on the Sudanese border, which is a detail that is incredibly important here.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into why that border matters so much. But to understand the sheer scale of what this crack represents, we're diving into a really comprehensive intelligence and geopolitical assessment today. It's titled The Shadow of Shererina, Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa.
It's a fantastic source.
Yeah.
It provides a really granular look at a highly volatile and, frankly, highly interconnected security environment.
So our mission for today's deep dive is to help you, the listener, understand how this single clash on a remote border actually threatens to ignite a massive multi-layered regional war.
Yeah, we were talking about shifting alliances, armed drones, and a huge struggle for control over the Red Sea and the Nile River.
Right, and for you listening, I want to stress that this isn't just a distant dispute. It is an absolute masterclass in how modern global conflicts escalate.
Absolutely.
Because it touches on global trade routes, water security, and how middle powers, countries like the UAE, Turkey, and China, are just completely rewriting the rules of modern warfare.
Yeah, they really are. But maybe we should start with the immediate spark at Shererina.
Good call. So the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, claims the federal army attacked first. Federal authorities have, well, they've pretty much remained quiet on confirming that.
Right, and the intelligence assessment frames this as mutual preemption.
Mutual preemption. So basically, like, I shoot because I think you're about to shoot.
Exactly. Trying to pinpoint a quote-unquote good guy or bad guy who shot first actually misses the mechanical reality of how wars restart.
Because trust between the federal government in Addis Ababa and the Tigrayan leadership in Mekelle hasn't just eroded, it has structurally collapsed, right?
Completely collapsed. When you have two heavily armed camps staring across a contested border and both are completely convinced the other is about to launch an offensive, well, waiting just becomes a strategic liability.
So a routine federal troop rotation looks like a vanguard attack to Tigray.
Yes, and a Tigrayan defensive mobilization looks like an operational threat to the federal government. So they both fire, and both legitimately believe they're acting in self-defense.
Which is terrifying. And we've been watching this paranoia build all through 2026. I mean, back in January, there were those brief frontier clashes and isolated drone strikes.
Right, and then by April, the political rupture became institutional. The TPLF restored its pre-war government under Chairman Debretsion Gebrauchel.
Which effectively dismantled the interim administration set up by the peace deal, right?
Exactly. It was a massive signal. Then in June, the U.S. State Department slapped visa restrictions on TPLF hardliners, explicitly warning that their actions were accelerating a return to war.
And by July, the rhetoric just went nuclear. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed publicly accused Sudan, Eritrea, and the TPLF of forming an active coalition designed to dismantle Ethiopia.
So that 2026 chronology really gives us the momentum, but the root cause requires us to look back at the November 2022 Pretoria Agreement.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the Pretoria deal stopped the catastrophic bloodshed of the 2020 to 2022 war.
It did, but rather than actually resolving the core disputes, it merely froze them in place.
It's like pouring a concrete foundation directly over an active seismic fault line. Like, sure, the building looked stable for a while, but the pressure underneath never went away.
That's a great way to put it. And the most explosive of those deferred questions is the status of Western Tigray, a territory that is also known to Amhara claimants as Welkate Tege.
And we really have to look at this impartially because both claims are deeply entrenched and tied to identity. Tigray claims the territory under the federal constitution's territorial boundaries.
Right, but Amhara organizations argue the land was historically amputated from their region after 1991, which is when the TPLF dominated the federal government.
And during the 2020 war, Amhara forces militarily seized it. And following that, human rights organizations documented mass expulsions and the ethnic cleansing of Tigrayans from the area.
Which creates an impossible political trap for the Ethiopian federal government today.
Right, because returning Western Tigray to the TPLF would immediately provoke massive rebellions in the Amhara region.
Exactly. And the federal military is already bogged down fighting significant sections of Amhara militias known as the Fano insurgency. It's this grueling asymmetric conflict that is just draining federal resources.
But on the flip side, leaving the territory under armed Amharic control renders the entire Pretoria peace deal politically unacceptable to the Tigrayan leadership.
Yeah, because Pretoria didn't establish any binding, enforceable mechanism to resolve this peacefully, so armed control just became the only law of the land.
Wow. But Ethiopia's internal structural flaws are only half the story here. The country's vulnerabilities are actively being exploited by its neighbors.
Oh, absolutely. And Eritrea's changing stance in this conflict is probably the most jarring geopolitical twist in the entire assessment.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. It feels like a real-life Game of Thrones episode to me with these shifting alliances.
It really does. Eritrea's foreign policy often appears erratic if you just view it through the lens of traditional alliances.
Right.
But if you analyze it through the lens of regime survival and threat assessment, it actually follows a really cold, consistent logic.
Let's trace that historical whiplash for a second. In 1991, the TPLF and Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki fought shoulder to shoulder to overthrow the Derg military government.
Right, they were allies.
But then just a few years later, from 1998 to 2000, they fought this brutal trench warfare border conflict against each other over a town called Badme.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of casualties.
Fast forward to 2020, and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed allies with Eritrea's Isaias to crush the TPLF.
And now, in 2026, the source reports a quote-unquote tactical convergence between Eritrea and the TPLF.
Wait, how on earth do Tigrayan forces cooperate with Eritrea when just a few years ago, Eritrean troops were credibly accused of horrific war crimes against Tigrayan civilians? Like, can a quote-unquote tactical convergence survive that kind of visceral bad blood?
I know, it sounds impossible. It requires an extreme level of cognitive dissonance, but it's driven by the sheer arithmetic of survival.
So it's not like they've forgiven each other.
No, not at all. This isn't reconciliation. Eritrea and the TPLF have not resolved their historical animosities.
Okay.
But in the current threat hierarchy, both sides calculate that Prime Minister Abiy's government in Addis Ababa represents a more immediate existential danger than they pose to each other.
And the mechanism driving that fear is the Red Sea, right?
Exactly. Ethiopia is landlocked.
Yeah.
But Prime Minister Abiy has recently and very aggressively pursued sovereign access to the Red Sea, specifically pointing to historic Ethiopian access to the Eritrean port of Assab.
And for Eritrea, a country that fought a decades-long, grueling war for its independence from Ethiopia, any coercive posturing toward its coastline is viewed as a direct threat to its existence as a sovereign state.
Yes. Eritrea's overarching strategic goal is strategic depth. President Isaias operates on a strict balance of power philosophy.
Meaning he doesn't want anyone in Ethiopia getting too strong.
Precisely. He wants to prevent any single actor within Ethiopia from centralizing enough power to dictate terms to Eritrea. So, by tacitly supporting or even just turning a blind eye to Tigrayan forces, Eritrea keeps the Ethiopian Federal Army bogged down in a multi-front internal crisis.
It's basically the geopolitical equivalent of offshore balancing.
Yeah.
Eritrea doesn't have to launch a costly conventional war. They just have to ensure Ethiopia is too distracted fighting itself to ever project force toward the Eritrean border.
And Eritrea isn't the only neighbor leveraging that exact same strategy of distraction. If we move to the western border, Sudan is actively exploiting the exact same internal chaos.
Okay, let's talk about Sudan because their calculations are entirely dictated by their own devastating civil war, right?
Yeah, you have the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SSF, fighting against the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. And the Sudanese army is deeply antagonistic toward Ethiopia right now.
Right, because of that Reuters investigation that recently alleged the United Arab Emirates is operating a covert training and supply camp for the RSF inside Ethiopian territory.
Yes, right near the Sudanese border.
Yeah.
Now, Ethiopia and the UAE vehemently deny it, but in geopolitics, perception dictates policy.
Of course.
For Sudan, it's a profound grievance. Add to that the fact that Sudan and Ethiopia have been actively fighting over a highly fertile, contested agricultural border area called Al-Fashaga.
Which brings us directly back to the geography of the August 1st clash. Shererina sits directly on that Sudanese border.
Exactly. Control of this specific frontier dictates whether Tigray can open an external supply line through Sudan.
So from the perspective of the Sudanese military, a heavily armed, capable Tigray ties up Ethiopian federal forces.
Yes. If Ethiopia is fighting in Tigray, they cannot facilitate UAE support for the RSF, and Sudan secures its eastern flank.
But Sudan's military doesn't want the Ethiopian state to completely collapse, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
Because a total collapse sends millions of refugees pouring across the border into eastern Sudan, which would completely overwhelm them.
Right, so it's a delicate balance. And Egypt is playing a remarkably similar game of strategic calibration here.
Ah, Egypt. Because Egypt is singularly focused on the Nile River and the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD, which was inaugurated back in September 2025.
Yes, Egypt relies almost entirely on the Nile for its fresh water supply. The strategic nightmare for Cairo is that Ethiopia, sitting upstream, now has the physical infrastructure to control the timing and volume of water releases.
Especially during multi-year droughts.
Exactly. So Egypt's response isn't to bomb the dam.
Right.
It's to deepen relationships with Ethiopia's adversaries,
Right.
like Eritrea and the Sudanese army.
Yeah.
They want leverage.
So if Addis Ababa is forced to pour all its military, economic, and diplomatic capital into containing domestic insurgencies in northern Ethiopia, they have zero leverage left to negotiate with Egypt on their own terms.
That is the defining theme here. Regional neighbors are treating Ethiopia's internal conflicts as levers they can pull to extract concessions on their own national security priorities.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, it sounds like a chaotic group project where everyone has a completely different grading rubric.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the picture gets significantly more complex when we zoom out to the distant middle powers.
Yeah, the source makes a fascinating point here, cautioning against viewing this as a simple, unified proxy war. The UAE, Turkey, and China aren't forming some coordinated pro-Ethiopia coalition.
Not at all. They are operating on entirely different archetypes of intervention. Let's look at the mechanisms.
Let's do it.
The UAE operates as an aggressive political security partner. They provide massive financial backing and military hardware to Ethiopia.
But their overarching regional strategy, like their alleged backing of the RSF in Sudan, is highly polarizing, right?
Very polarizing. They aren't afraid to pick winners and losers to secure their influence. Contrast that with Turkey, which operates on a highly transactional model.
Right, because Turkey is a major supplier of advanced weaponry. Notably, the Bayraktar TB2 armed drones that have been so crucial for the Ethiopian federal forces.
Yes, but Turkey actively positions itself as a diplomatic intermediary, prioritizing its own status as an indispensable broker. We saw this when they mediated the maritime dispute between Ethiopia and Somalia in 2024.
So they sell the weapons, but they also want to host the peace talks.
Exactly. And then you have China playing the long game as an economic stakeholder.
Right, yes, they've supplied wing-loom armed drones in the past, but their primary objective is protecting their massive infrastructure investments.
Specifically, the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Economic Corridor.
So China operates with extreme caution. They want to maintain viable relations with both Ethiopia and Eritrea without getting sucked into localized ethnic or territorial alignments.
Which means the Ethiopian federal government is still directing its own military strategy, but its capacity to physically wage war is heavily subsidized by external actors who are pursuing contradictory goals.
It really makes you wonder if Ethiopia is actually in control of its own country right now, or if it has just become a proxy playground.
It's a bit of both. These middle powers are pouring advanced technology and capital into conflicts whose root causes unresolved federalism and disputed territory are entirely local.
And when you pour 21st century drone technology into unresolved, localized territorial disputes, the human beings on the ground pay an unfathomable price.
They do. It is critical we ground this analysis in the staggering reality of what the 2020 to 2022 war actually looked like.
Because we've talked a lot about strategy and drones, but what stands out to me is that the everyday Ethiopian is the ultimate loser here.
The human cost of the last war was apocalyptic. While telecommunications blackouts and the total collapse of the healthcare system make exact accounting impossible, the African Union mediator cited estimates of up to 600,000 deaths.
600,000.
Yes. That includes direct combat fatalities, but also the cascading effects of engineered famine, untreated disease, and the systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure.
And United Nations-linked reporting documented over 10,000 survivors of systematic sexual violence.
Which is horrific.
And they noted that the true number is exponentially higher due to extreme stigma and the weaponization of sexual violence as a tool of war. We're talking about the potential resumption of a conflict in a region where the hospitals, the agricultural sector, and the social fabric haven't even begun to recover.
And the military balance entering this potential new phase is highly asymmetrical. Ethiopia possesses a massive conventional state apparatus, significant air power, and a formidable drone fleet.
But their forces are severely degraded and overextended, right? Because they are fighting the Fano insurgency in the Amhara region.
Yes.
And simultaneously, they are fighting the Oromo Liberation Army, the OLA, in the south and west.
Right, fighting on 3 separate domestic fronts hollows out logistics, depletes morale, and forces impossible resource allocation choices.
But on the other side, Tigray has highly experienced military commanders, a deeply decentralized mobilization structure, and an intimate familiarity with the mountainous terrain.
But their economy is ruined, their population is traumatized, and they are geographically surrounded.
So based on this incredibly fragile balance, the intelligence assessment outlines 4 plausible trajectories for how the clash at Shererina evolves. The first trajectory is a contained frontier confrontation.
Which would basically mirror what we saw in January.
Okay, so just a few days of intense localized fighting at Shererina.
Exactly, followed by a mutual unspoken withdrawal. Both sides test each other's defenses, signal their willingness to fight, but deliberately step back before triggering a general mobilization.
Okay, what about the second trajectory?
The second trajectory is a renewed Ethiopia-Tigray war. This is the nightmare scenario for the civilian population.
Because it involves immediate nationwide telecommunications blackouts, federal drone strikes targeting Tigrayan command nodes, and massive, grueling ground infantry battles over western Tigray.
Yes, a full return to the horrors of 2020. The third trajectory expands the scope even further, a regionalized proxy war.
So this is where the neighbors get directly involved.
Yeah, this occurs if Sudan's military actively facilitates a weapons supply line to Tigray across the border. Eritrea begins providing operational intelligence or artillery support to Tigrayan forces, and the UAE dramatically scales up its financial and drone assistance to Ethiopia.
So western Tigray transforms into the bloody interception between Ethiopia's internal collapse and Sudan's civil war.
Exactly.
That brings us to the fourth trajectory, which the assessment identifies as the absolute most dangerous outcome, a direct Ethiopia-Eritrea war.
Yeah, and this wouldn't just be about Tigray. This would likely be sparked by Ethiopia taking aggressive, coercive action to secure Red Sea access.
In this scenario, you could see Eritrean forces and Tigrayan forces actively coordinating military operations against the Ethiopian Federal Army.
It would be devastating for the entire Horn of Africa.
So looking at the constraints on all these actors, does the assessment point to one of these being the most likely in the short term? I mean, are we looking at full-scale war tomorrow?
Well, the assessment actually concludes that the probability of a full-scale regional war remains slightly lower than the probability of continued high-intensity limited clashes.
Oh, really? Why is that?
The deterrent here is mutual paralyzing vulnerability. Ethiopia is militarily overstretched, Tigray is economically devastated, Eritrea lacks the economic capacity for a protracted conventional war, and Sudan is literally consuming itself in a civil war.
So basically no single actor possesses the overwhelming capacity to achieve a decisive victory.
Exactly. But the assessment includes a massive caveat: deterrence can fail by accident.
Because of that mutual preemption we talked about earlier, when both sides misread defensive preparations as imminent offensive attacks.
All right. The conflict at Shererina proves that this is no longer just the resumption of an old civil war. It has mutated.
Yeah, local grievances over a patch of land have been completely hijacked by a wider Horn of Africa security dilemma involving water rights, port access, and global middle powers testing their new weapons.
The integration of advanced military technology into deeply historical, localized conflicts creates a terrifying new paradigm.
Which actually brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Looking closely at the influx of Turkish and Chinese armed drones. The source touches on how precision strike capabilities alter the strategic balance, but I wonder if they also create a profound moral hazard.
Well, that's an interesting point.
Right. Think about the psychology of war. Does the possession of unmanned technology trick political leaders into a false sense of security?
Like, does watching a screen in a command center convince them they can conduct a limited, quote-unquote, cost-free strike from the sky?
Exactly. Entirely disconnected from the messy, uncontrollable reality on the ground. Because if leaders believe they can surgically control the ladder of escalation, they might just accidentally sleepwalk their entire region into an irreversible, catastrophic war.
It forces us to question whether technology gives us more control over conflict, or simply makes it easier to spark a conflagration we can no longer contain.
Yeah. Remember that avalanche we talked about at the beginning?
Cracks in the ice.
Yeah. The drone strikes, the border clashes, the tactical convergences. They aren't the cracks on the surface. They're the massive tectonic plates shifting miles beneath the ice. And right now, the entire mountain is groaning.
It really is.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, keep exploring the hidden mechanisms, and we'll catch you next time.